Hello everyone, my name is Jarrod, Managing Director of the Real Story Group, and I want to thank you for joining us today for the latest in our webinar series. Today's topic is Stop Comparing Apples to Dump Trucks, Create the Right Vendor Shortlist with the RealQuadrant. And I'll be getting into what RealQuadrant is. It's a new offering from Real Story Group, but the creation of this tool was really born out of a lot of frustration that we're seeing from many of our clients, and I hope you'll see why we think RealQuadrant will help alleviate some of that frustration for many of you out there going forward. So again, thank you for taking some time out of your day today. This is going to be a fairly quick webinar today. We have a half-hour schedule, but we'll get through it as quickly as we can to get you back to your day and your important work that you are all doing. But let's get started here. For those of you who are with the Real Story Group, we are fundamentally a research and analyst firm that looks at really 7 core marketplaces. If you were to look at all of these marketplaces and try to put them in one big bucket, you might call them content-based technologies. They're all about all these technologies that we spend our days looking at. All these technologies are really around managing content through a life cycle, right? Now, where they differ is how they get that content out to the right person at the right time. It's very different from a web content management scenario to a digital asset management scenario to a marketing automation scenario to a document management scenario. Very different use cases, but again, it's all about managing content. Now, if you were to break this down even further into 2 real big buckets, what we're covering here is what we call marketing technology. So things like web content management, digital and media asset management, and marketing automation and social technologies really fall under that marketing technology bucket. The other areas that we cover are more internally focused, and we call that our digital workplace technologies. So things like enterprise collaboration and social software across your organization, things like portals and content integration, things like ECM or document management and cloud file sharing, and of course SharePoint and its many incarnations within many organizations. So again, 7 marketplaces, but all around managing content. If we break that down further, again, for those of you who are new to Real Story Group, this is the world that we live in. Here's those 7 marketplaces represented as lines of a subway map, and each of the stops on these lines of the subway map represent a vendor that we cover. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list of the vendors that we cover. What we always like to say about this vendor map is we encourage you to use it and to learn about the different areas that we cover and the different vendors that are players out there and the different overlaps between these different marketplaces. But we always say, please try not to read too much into this, right? It's meant to be helpful in a couple ways, but people are always asking, well, why is this vendor next to this vendor? Well, it's on the same line for a reason, but their actual placement on the line isn't that sophisticated. But what is important to note from this map is that as a buyer of technology, you have options, and lots of options, right? So if I'm looking at purchasing a web content management tool, for example, I can look at that light blue line and see I have a lot of different vendors out there who are producing web content management solutions that I might be interested in. In addition to pure play vendors who are only on the blue line, you also have a number of big vendor names, that I'm sure you're all aware of, the hubs in the middle, if you will, who are trying to be players in multiple of these areas, of these marketplaces. So again, there's no right answer as to who you should go with here, but as a potential buyer of any of these types of technologies, it's great to see that you have options. Again, as I mentioned at the outset, today I'm going to be primarily talking about this new tool from Real Story Group called RealQuadrant ShortList Generator. It's our latest in our kind of toolkit, if you will. This joins our our RealScore effectiveness model, which is aimed for to help organizations assess where you are in terms of effectiveness across technology, people, processes, and content, and do some benchmarking against not only your own organization, but also versus your peers within your organization and within your industry, I should say, and across industry. So a really powerful effectiveness benchmarking tool, and that's RealScore. Today, though, we're going to be talking about the shortlist generator, RealQuadrant, and a little bit about what we call real time, because those two tools on the left there are very, very related. So with that said, why are we having this conversation? Well, you saw the map, the vendor map, and you know, I mentioned that it's good news that you have a lot of options out there when it comes to buying technology. However, with a lot of options comes a lot of confusion in the marketplace, and there can be a lot of confusion as a buyer, even trying to understand where you should begin. Where should I start looking? You know, you might have a mandate from your organization to say, hey, we need a new web content management system, but as you start doing Google searches and looking at analyst reports and hearing from your friends as to what systems they're using, you're gonna get a lot of different answers from a lot of different people. So what we encourage our clients to do is to really place a lot of emphasis on getting the right shortlist, and as one of the real key points in selecting the right technology. And so what we do when we write our vendor and technology evaluations, it's really with the goal of getting you to the right shortlist, right? You'll never hear us at Real Story Group say there's a best vendor out there, but there is a group of vendors that are probably a really good fit for what it is you're trying to do, and to, as quickly as possible, get to that right shortlist, okay? But that's where the hard work really begins. You know, once you get to that right shortlist, then we want you to do diligence via what we call a testable process. You know, if you've attended Real Story Group webinars in the past, I'm sure you've heard us talk about scenarios, and using scenarios to really put those shortlisted vendors through the paces of giving them an RFP that they need to respond to in detail that responds to your unique scenarios, making these vendors jump through some hoops in the course of some vendor demos, and then finally through a competitive competitive proof of concept, or as commonly known as a bake-off, really putting the vendors again through their paces in head-to-head pilots. So that process we found really works well, and again, this is the process we recommend for all of our clients who are going through a technology selection process. But in order to do this right, in order to be really successful in engaging this process, you need to have the right shortlist. I can't tell you how many times that we see organizations inviting vendors to the party who are just fundamentally a bad fit for the unique situation that they're trying to solve. And that's really what we're talking about today. We want you to stop comparing apples to dump trucks. Instead, I want you to compare apples to apples to apples, not apples to dump trucks. And let's face it, there's a lot of apples out there, and you know what? There's a lot of dump trucks too. So this is a very common visual in our industry. This is from Chief Martech. If you haven't checked out chiefmartech.com, it's a great blog to follow. Scott Brinker does a great job putting this together every year, and this is what this aims to show. And I don't expect you to be able to see all the logos on this screen, but what this does show you is that even more than the vendors that we show on our subway map, you have tons of options out there. And this is just meant to show marketing technology, right? We could do another slide almost as big, not quite as big, but an ever-growing industry representation of the digital workplace vendors that I mentioned, you know, the internally focused things. These are just the externally focused vendors. So there's a ton of options out there, and you know, we as analysts try to put boxes around things and make sense of this for you and try to help you out and help you wade through this marketplace, just like Scott's doing here and putting boxes around these different categories, if you will. But yeah, as you might expect, these categories are not as black and white as one may make them out to be, or as we analysts try to portray them as. You know, it is a blurry world out there. There's a lot of gray area, and there's a lot of vendors that are crossing over into different use cases. And that's okay, but you need to have your eyes open as you're putting together the right shortlist for what it is you're trying to do. So that's really why we put together this webinar today, and particularly why we built the RealQuadrant ShortList Builder. Is we found that unfortunately people were putting together the wrong shortlists, and some reasons for that were certainly the vendor marketing and sales that is happening quite readily, where vendors come into different organizations to get asked to pitch different organizations, and they say, hey, our software is a solution for whatever it is you're trying to do. It's good at everything. And they're not necessarily lying, but they're not telling you how much customization and configuration and wrangling of these technologies and these vendors to get them to do what it is you're trying to do and to fulfill your unique needs. And you know, what we've found is that that's not a good way to go about this type of technology implementations. We want you to find products that are fundamentally good fits and built for the use cases and scenarios that you're trying to achieve. And so we want you to come up with a short list that is truly comparing apples to apples to apples to apples, so that every one of those vendors on your short list has a chance of winning. I can't tell you how much time is wasted when that's not the case, right? There's nothing worse than getting in a vendor demo where you have your group of 10 key stakeholders within your organization who are part of your selection team sitting around that table, all excited for this vendor to come in and demonstrate their wares to you, and it's just not a good fit. You've wasted their time, you've wasted the vendor's time, you've wasted everyone's time, and you're no closer to a solution. And so that's really what we're trying to get at today. So with that said, let's pop over to the demo phase of this presentation. And to do that, I'm going to show you a look at the behind the scenes logged in area of the Real Story Group subscription service. So I know many of you on the call today are Real Story Group subscribers, and I welcome you. And this screen should be very familiar to you, where you have your vendor evaluations at the top, your Real Score benchmarking access at the bottom, and then it links to these tools on the side here. And again, we're gonna talk about RealQuadrant today, so let's go there. So the first thing I want people to do when coming up with the right shortlist is to pick the technology marketplace. Excuse me. I'm getting all choked up over here over the thought of getting the right shortlist. Excuse me on that. I had my drink of water. I think I'm good to go. But the first thing is to pick the right technology here. And we've, again, broken it down into the areas that we cover. You could pick campaign and lead management technology. So here's looking at a lot of that marketing automation technology that's out there. We cover digital and marketing asset management, ECM, so document management and cloud file sharing, enterprise collaboration and social software, enterprise portals and web content and experience management. For the sake of this demo today, I'll just select one. Let's pick enterprise portals. So once you do that, we can get started. And the first thing that we ask you is to identify some criteria that is most acceptable to your enterprise. So we ask you some core questions. First question is, does your enterprise have a technology preference? We encounter some organizations that say, nope, we don't have a preference. We want to work with the solution that's the best fit for what it is we're trying to do. We don't care what language it's in. We'll resource it appropriately. But other organizations have declared themselves as .NET shops or Java shops or strictly open source type organizations. So here's where you can say, if you're a .NET shop, let's only look at the .NET solutions, or let's only look at .NET and Java, or just Java. But for the sake of this demo, let's assume you're open to all. The next question that we ask is, do you care, or does your enterprise care, if the solution is purchased via a commercial license or an open source license model? Again, certain organizations have a bias to go to a traditional license model, or they want to go with an open source model, and you can kind of do a binary selection there. Third question is, do you care if this solution is installed on your servers or provided as a cloud service? So either you can select, I don't care and I want to consider everything, or I only want to consider a cloud service. So whether it's managed cloud or multi-tenant cloud, or if your organization is not ready for the cloud yet, maybe you just want to consider on-premise. Again, let's assume that you're open to considering all at this point. And then finally, on this criteria step, we ask you if you care if the vendors have a particular geographic footprint. Some organizations have a presence in a certain area of the world, and they want a vendor that is fundamentally located in that area, and so you can choose to limit your search by region, if you will. But again, let's assume any region for this demo. Next, let's get to what we consider really the most important part of putting together a shortlist, and that's doing some self-identification with some canonical use case scenarios. When it comes to portals, we've identified 9 canonical scenarios that we think enterprise portals are fundamentally suited for. But the key here is that every portal that's built out there is not suited for all 9 of these scenarios. They're fundamentally suited for a small subset of those 9. And so within each of the areas that we cover, we have identified a number of scenarios that correspond with that industry and what those systems are fundamentally built to do. But at this phase, what we're asking you is to self-identify with what it is you're trying to do. So I can assure you that if you're thinking about buying a portal, you're not going to be trying to do all these 9 scenarios either. But you're probably going to be looking to accomplish 1 or 2 of these, maybe 3 or 4 of these scenarios. Let's assume in this case that you're looking for a portal to help you with some dynamic content publishing. In addition, you want to create a self-service portal. So looking at more of an externally facing type portal that allows people to come to it and do some self-service, but at the same time you want to do some content publishing to the visitors who are coming to your portal. So next, once you have identified those scenarios, they appear here, and instead of just treating them equally, we now ask you if you have certain weightings in mind. So in this case, let's assume that it is going to be primarily a self-service portal, but it's also going to do some content publishing. So maybe we want to weight it at 60-40 to give a little bit more weighting towards self-service. Once you have those weightings in place, then we ask you to look at some other criteria, and we call these our strategic considerations. And if you notice here, they're really broken up into 3 different areas, excuse me. 1, vendor, 2, product, and 3, ecosystem. But there's 10 different strategic considerations in these 3 groupings. And here is where we want you to identify things that are really important to you. Some organizations, the value for money trumps all, and we give a little bit more weightings to that area. Other organizations are really concerned with the viability and stability of a vendor. Other organizations, customer support is really important. For some organizations, they're going to be relying heavily on the vendor's professional services to do an implementation. So for those cases, we might rate them higher and rate that as a more important strategic consideration. But again, it's really just about doing some weightings, all adding up to 100% at the end of the day, but weighting what is most important to you and your organization. Once you have that, then we get to the shortlist. So what we do here, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. I know it's a little small on your screen, but bear with me for 1 second. It's going to make it a little bit more readable in the long run here. But what we did is based on those unique scenarios that we just plugged into the criteria screens and the weightings that we applied to all of those different categories and strategic considerations, we then plot the vendors as to their fit for your needs. So if you notice on the left side here, we plot it based on strategic consideration fit, and along the bottom, we're plotting it in terms of the scenario fit or the use case scenario fit that we weighted. And so if I look at this here, what I've got is I don't have a quadrant that is a single snapshot view of the marketplace that is generic for every single person who looks at it. Instead, I have a view of the marketplace that is customized to me and my needs, what I've told the tool that is most important to me. But the idea behind RealQuadrant is to get you to a short list. So I don't think we have a short list yet. So how can we refine this even more to get down to a better fit? So we default originally to a looser fit, showing you vendors plotted across all 4 quadrants here. But I could do a medium fit that shows me only the vendors that appear in the upper 3, or even a better fit that shows me the vendors that appear up in the upper right quadrant. Let's look at a medium fit just for the sake of having a little bit more options here. And the portal marketplace is one of the smaller marketplaces that we cover. Some of the other marketplaces that you'll see us cover, we cover a lot more vendors because there are more significant players in there, and you'll see a much wider scatter shot of vendor placement. But from here, we can do some interesting things. From here, we can start to dig into the details. And one of the things that I like to do is start to zoom in on some of the vendors in the upper right here, and it's a pretty cool zoom feature that we have. So I can see, okay, start looking at some of these vendors. SAP and Oracle have a similar score in this case, but they both had a scenario score of 55 and a strategic consideration score of 55. If we look at Frey in this case, the scenario score was 60 and the strategic consideration score was 62.5. If I click on this, I can actually look at how we got to those scores. So this is, again, LifeRay. You can see that here's our weightings that we asked it to consider. Here's the scores our analysts gave this vendor as to what how good of a fit it is for these particular scenarios, and here are the strategic consideration scores down the right side here. So that's how we're getting these results, and that's how we're getting these vendors to plot in the areas that they are. So we can reset the zoom and pull it out a little bit. But as I mentioned at the outset, getting to the short list is really just the first step in getting to the right vendor, right? This is where the hard work begins, where you start to do your due diligence. And what we try to do here is give you the information that you need to start comparing these as, again, apples to apples to apples. So if we look at the raw scores here, we can start to see, okay, here are my 2 scenarios, and I can start to see how do those vendors on that short list compare to each other. So now I can compare them head to head here. I can flip it over to strategic considerations and see how they stack up head to head on all 10 of those strategic consideration areas, and as I can scroll through and back, but I have all that information here at my fingertips. I can even get into some of the high level details, right? I can start to pull up the strengths and weaknesses of these different tools. So at a glance, I can see, okay, what's going on with IBM WebSphere portal here, and how does it compare to something like Backbase? Again, starting to do your due diligence, giving you the key points that you need, but we want you to go even further. Again, the shortlist is just the start. So getting to the next level here, I can now download these reports in a couple different ways. So pull this pop-up window over, I can download the full evaluation report, everything we've written about portals in this case, or I can download a custom evaluation report that just includes these 6 vendors that I have on my list here, which is a pretty powerful thing. So I actually opened this up prior and I generated one of these custom reports. But here's a custom report that has those 6 vendors. It has all the ratings. It has the comments and analysis on why we gave those ratings, as well as a real deep dive into why we think these vendors are suited for the scenarios that we give them the high ratings in there, and maybe more importantly, why aren't they suited for other scenarios. And I'm just quickly going through this, but if anyone wants a free chapter of their own to sample what our analysis looks like, you can go to our website and just download a sample from each of our reports. Really easy to do, and it'll give you a full chapter, not redacted at all, and really gives you a sense of our tone and voice as to how we're trying to give you the real story about what these vendors are good at and what they're not so good at. In addition to downloading a report, you can do a couple of other things in here. You can save your search and come back to it at a different time. You can email your search and results to a colleague, which is pretty powerful in evangelizing the results that you got. Or you can even export your results to Excel. This was a request by several of our clients, and again, I did this prior to this demo, so we'd have it here. But if I click that button, what it does is pops open an Excel document that gives me some real powerful things. So in the first tab, I get the actual quadrant of my shortlisted vendors. I can take this and put it into a PowerPoint if I want. I see the weighting tables that I used, so you have that for posterity. I see the scores as it relates to those various scenarios. I see the strategic consideration scores. And I have my strengths and weaknesses all within Excel. So our goal here is to help people help our clients create deliverables or presentations or ways to communicate the due diligence that you're doing within your organization. And in addition, in response to some client requests, we even give you the raw scores. So I know we usually give our scores in the form of Harvey balls. We call them, the pieces of the pie, if you will, 0 to 4. But here we're giving you the raw scores. So some people want to do a more numerical analysis. That's here for you to do as well. So all that's there at your fingertips for you to utilize. Again, coming back to here, I want to just really emphasize that the goal here is for you to get to the right shortlist. Find the vendors that are the right fit for what it is you're trying to do. And we think that this is a much more dynamic way for you to do that. It's a way for you to really justify your shortlist decisions. It's so often that we see random vendors appearing on shortlist, and even when you go through a long drawn-out process, people at the end of the process say, how did that vendor get on this list again? And here you have the evidence to prove it, right? You did your due diligence, you have the research to back you up, you have the weightings and the strategic consideration weightings that you took into play. You have that all at your fingertips, ready for you to use. So I hope you find this as a more custom, a more relevant, a more real way for you to come up with a short list. I hope you enjoyed this quick walkthrough today, but if you want to try it yourself, go to realstorygroup.com. You can try it. We allow you to try the whole thing. The only thing I will say is we're not going to give you the full short list. That's reserved for our subscribers. But again, you can get an entire chapter for free, and each of the marketplaces that we cover, we make one chapter available to you. So please feel free to try that out, and please feel free to send along any comments that you have, good and bad, improvements that you'd like to see in the future, or things that you like, and tell us how you'll use it within your organization. We're always glad to hear from you. So with that, I don't think we have any questions right now, so that's great. But we will I'm sorry, we do have one question here, and that's around a particular vendor that we're not covering at the moment. And I can tell you, sir, that we are constantly evaluating the marketplace, and as soon as we start seeing vendors on short lists of our clients competing against the vendors that we're covering, that's when we really take notice. But we are constantly monitoring the vendors that are out there, and our analysts have their fingers on what's really the most significant in the marketplace, and we are adding new vendors all the time. But in the meantime, if you're a vendor, you can send us any information you want about your products. We'll be glad to check them out. But really, we'll start covering you once we start seeing you on some vendor shortlists. So with that said, thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate you taking some time. And if anyone wants a more personalized demo or some more information, feel free to reach out to either myself or my colleagues at Real Story Group, and we'll be happy to give you another demo for you or your colleagues. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time on next week's webinar.